Okay, so hello everybody. Um, Thank you very much for joining me. If at any point you can't hear me or see the slides or whatever, please somebody say so. So I'm talking on the topic of online Christian communities here. This is a chapter in the volume that was co-authored between myself, a sociologist of digital religion based in the UK, and Moisés Sbardelotto, a Catholic theologian based in Brazil. So it's got an interdisciplinary angle to it. And if you read the chapter, which I hope you will, one of the questions that recurs in the background of that chapter is the relationship between digital religion and digital theology. To what extent is digital theology building on or coming back to or created on a foundation of digital religions construction of an understanding of what's really happening in digital contexts. I'm not mostly talking about that question today, although I'd be very interested to come back to that in the Q&A if we do. I'm going to try in my 15 minutes to tackle three aspects of our chapter. I think we really enjoyed writing this chapter together and threw a lot of ideas into it. It could perhaps have been three chapters of different handbooks, but this is what we've got. So there's a lot of stuff bubbling over in the chapter that we've put together. I'm going to first talk about theological images that recur in discussion of online community. We're then going to talk about the idea of ecclesiogenesis, which I'm understanding in the context of this talk to be basically a question that says, where does anything new come around in digital theology? And finally, we'll talk about some models of digital theology based on some of my own undergraduate teaching, which I introduced at the end of our chapter. So, first question, images. If you read Christian writing about the question of community online, this is a topic that has been of intense interest to Christian observers of the internet ever since at least the 1980s. And there are certain key theological images that recur in that discourse. And each of those images, we argue, has a certain kind of assumption or a stance built into it. We identify four of these images in our chapter. We were asked before this to see if there might be something we could say about the new papal encyclical. And I think there's a fifth image in there. So I'm going to slightly expand our chapter in the context of this talk. So the four images we mention are the epistle, the Trinity, the incarnation, and the body. Each of those works in a different kind of way. So the epistle is a theological argument that says, basically, Christians should use every available tool to get their message out as widely as possible. And the classic, somewhat cliched biblical example of this is St. Paul, who writes letters. And so you'll often find in Christian writing about the internet this recurring argument that says, well, Paul used the new technology of his day to get his message out as widely as possible. Let's do the same thing now. So that's like a simple tool level understanding of what sort of a thing the internet is. In more, often more speculative digital theology, I find the idea of the Trinity recurs quite a lot. Trinitarian digital theology says there's something in the idea of networking, of connection, of communication that is not just a new technological opportunity, but it's essential to our understanding of God. God is a networked thing, a networked being, and online community, therefore, is in the image of God. You get language of the dance and so on that pops up in that kind of Trinitarian digital theological writing. Third image that we found very interesting is the incarnation. The incarnation, compared to the Trinity, is a rather more ambivalent idea. Incarnational digital theology says God becomes flesh to enter into a world that needs light, a world that is a place of darkness. And so Christians, following God's example, should become present online. They should go where people are, while recognizing that the online world is a place of fallenness, a place of darkness into which light needs to be brought. And the final image that we talk about is the body. The body we think of as a slightly more recent theological image, really in line with what digital religion scholars say about the interconnectedness of online and offline activity. The body basically says the online community is part of the church, the body of Christ. Our online and our offline and our in-person and our embodied and our mediated relationships are all part of who we are, and part of who the Christian community is. So that's 4 different images that we find that guide Christian thinking about online community in different directions. That brings us to Magnificat Humanitas. Pleasingly, from my point of view, those images we talked about turn up in the encyclical, particularly in the conclusion at the end. There's a mention of the incarnation. There's a use of the body. But there's also, interestingly, a lot of focus on the construction site. This is another classic image from Christian writing about technology, the Tower of Babel, or the New Jerusalem, or the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, as are used in this particular version. In this particular encyclical, those ideas are used to encourage. So first of all, relevant to this, they're used in the context of community, which I found very interesting. So this is an encyclical about AI, but written from the perspective of the Christian community. The church as a community needs to engage with this, and to do so in a way that builds the civilization of love. So it's a very community-oriented way of engaging with this technology. What I like about this as an image, that it adds something to those 4 images we've mentioned before, is the activity. The point of the construction site image, as I understand it, in this encyclical, is that it calls Christians to be active designers, builders, negotiators of technology. There's an obvious digital religion analog to that, which I'll come on to at the end of this talk. So that's some theological images, each of which brings an assumption, a stance. Second point, is any of this going to be new? One of the things you find as you read digital theology or Christian writing about the internet is the same kinds of problems turn up year after year, decade after decade. So, in a section of our chapter that Moisés led on, he identifies 3 big themes that turn up a lot in digital theology writing: connection, embodiment, and authority. But then asks, is any of that new? Is it changing over time? I want to suggest a little bit, yes, in an interesting kind of way. We looked particularly at Catholic digital ecclesiology to say, is there something that changes in the encyclicals and the documents that are produced by the Catholic Church? Within each document, I would suggest, the emphasis is on continuity. The usual presentation is to say, here are many things that the Catholic Church has produced in the past. Those are all still correct. This is how we apply them to the new situation. You don't tend to get papal encyclicals that say, by gum, we really blew it last time. Sorry, everybody. Let's have another go. But what's interesting is if you read a number of these things next to each other, you can see changes. So we argue, if you look at one of the first Catholic writings on the internet, the Church and Internet, published back in 2002, there's a real, not hostility to online community. There's positive things there said about the internet. But the basic argument, as I see it, is, as a quote I've put on the slide here, pastoral planning should consider how to lead people from cyberspace to true community. The stuff you find online is not really good enough. It's not really up to scratch. And we compared that to what was, at the time we wrote the chapter, the latest cutting edge thing that the Catholic Church had produced, which was a document called Towards Full Presence, published 2023. And I think the stance is different there. There's much more of an acceptance in that later document that full presence, activity, the flesh, these are all absolutely essential, but internet-mediated communication and relationship is part of that full presence. You can get full presence online, is how I read that later document. So there's a move. Something has changed over time. How does that change happen? That's my third point of this. And I promise I'm keeping an eye on the time. I'm going to start here with a model of digital theology that you will probably be very familiar with, which we also use in digital religion. I know Heidi Campbell has been present a lot in this conference. So the religious social shaping of technology is a model that Heidi develops particularly in When Religion Meets New Media, a book from about 2010. It's then adapted for a theological context, working with Stephen Garner in Networked Theology, slightly later book. And it suggests thinking about 4 phases of engagement with technology: history and tradition, core beliefs and patterns, a negotiation process, and a communal framing and discourse. The idea here, which I'm sure you know already, is that religious groups, as they run into a new technology, begin by reflecting on their own core beliefs, patterns, their tradition of engaging with technology, and then actively work with the new technology, rebuild it, rethink it, write angry letters to the developers to say, do this differently, before working out how it should be used. So religion is a very active, religious communities can play a very active role in engaging with technologies. Now, in the Networked Theology book, as I read it, those 4 ideas are presented with a direction, from 1 down to 4. The correct theological model, as proposed in that book, is that your group should start by reflecting on its history, identifying its core beliefs and patterns, and then begin negotiating with the technology, and then figure out what to do about it. It's very interesting, I think, if you look at Magnificat Humanitas, that it follows that pattern. I'm not necessarily saying that the Pope has got a copy of Networked Theology on his shelf. Sure, he does. But the structure, the chapter outline of the encyclical follows that pattern very neatly, starting with an explanation of Catholic social doctrine, then engaging with the technology, then working out what to do about it afterwards. And of course, the emphasis on calling the Christian community to be actively engaged in the development of these technologies is very much in line with what the religious social shaping of technology theological approach calls for. So that's one model. I'm going to be slightly cheeky now, and hopefully this won't come back to bite me in the questions, and show you an example of something that I use in my undergraduate classes more critically as an example of digital theology that I don't think is very good. It's this website called AI for Churches, produces something called The Biblical Case for Using AI for Sermons, which is an essay arguing that churches should be using AI to write their sermons for them, more or less. And the argument goes like this. Here are a couple of quotes. Paul was known to use whatever tools he had at his disposal to share Jesus. As Christians today, we share the same calling as Paul. So we need to use every tool we have available to help us work towards that goal. Is that the religious social shaping of technology? I say no when I'm talking to my students, because I think the order is reversed. Instead of saying first reflect on your tradition and your core practices before you engage with the technology, what I see here is someone who's started with the answer. They've already got a very clear sense that technology is the answer and they want to sell that technological product. And then they're going back into the Christian tradition to find a justification for what they've already decided to do. So the key bit of this essay is when it counts, we want to use the very best tools we can find to get the job done. And the assumption is AI is the best tool available. So it's the 4 phases of the religious social shaping of technology backwards. When I'm talking to students, I give that a different name. I call it the techno-social shaping of religion. The driving force here is technology. It's a discourse about what technology does that religion is then accepting. And you find that quite frequently, I think, in religious engagement with new technologies. This is what we've all got to do. We've got to get with the program. So this AI essay is not a unique example. It's an example of a very common tendency, I think. But when I talk to students, I suggest there's a third way of modeling digital theology, which is a spiral. Instead of going through the 4 phases in a linear way, move in a spiral direction so that your negotiation with the technology, your engagement, your active learning about what the technology can do, in turn can give you new insights into your own history, core beliefs, and practices. And my argument when I'm talking to students is that that's what a good research project looks like. You go out there, you do your empirical engagement, your engagement with the real thing shows you something new about your original theories and presuppositions, and that leads to movement. Now, I don't think in towards full presence as a single document, you're going to see that spiral acknowledged. But if you compare that document to what went earlier, you can see that a spiraling model of digital theology has happened. The church has engaged with online community. It's learned a bit more about what you can really accomplish in online and mediated relationships. And that has led to a new appreciation of what it means to be fully present in the Catholic tradition. It's not exactly the religious social shaping of technology. It's a different kind of a spiraling process, which I call digital theology. So I'll end this 46 seconds over time by asking where digital theology might move after Magnificat Humanitas. I've suggested Magnificat Humanitas, as published, is quite a linear document, starts with history and core beliefs and doctrines, and then applies those to the case of AI. What I wonder is where new insights might be found in the future as the church starts to reflect a bit more on what it's learning from its engagement with AI, rather than trying to apply old ideas to that new context. And that's where I'll stop. So thank you for listening. You can now tell me that I'm completely wrong.